Well, hi everyone. This is episode 12 of our online series for the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium. I am here today with my co-host, Irving Wladawsky-Berger, and also our guest today is Tom Davenport. I'll introduce him in a second, but before we begin, let me do just a little bit of housekeeping. The next CIO Symposium will be on May 19, 2026. We do hope that you join us. Tickets will go on sale in early November. Um, and do note that if you become a member of our Innovator Network, you will be eligible to get a ticket to our pre-event, which is on May 18th, the day before the symposium. And so we hope you'll join us for that. I also want to mention that in addition to these public podcasts, we have a variety of public and limited access events in our online community. Our Innovator series is for paid subscribers to our community, and members of our Innovator Network pay $75 a year. They get access to that series, plus they get discounted tickets to the symposium and access to the pre-event. In September, we'll be kicking off the 2026 season. Uh, we'll be kicking off with 3 public events. This is part of our partner series. And so on Wednesday, September 3rd, we'll have a couple of gentlemen from Zyfino talking about the evolution of the annual audit embracing continuous governance. And then on Wednesday, September 10th, we'll have a gentleman from Macero talking about developing the most critical success factors in the AI age, which he says is soft skills. Finally, on September 17, we'll have one of our partners, the MIT Free Speech Alliance, coming and doing a talk. I don't have a title for that one, but stay tuned in our network for that. Okay, well, today, as I said, we have Tom Davenport as our special guest. Tom is the President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College. He's also the co-founder of the International Institute for Analytics, a fellow at the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, and a senior advisor to Deloitte Analytics. So welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Allan. Happy to be here. Always fun to talk to you and Irving.
And welcome to you too, Irving. I'm always glad
Thank
to
you.
have you. So
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm particularly excited to be here with Tom.
yeah, I think we both are
You
because,
say that to all the guys, Irving.
well, we have a lot of questions, Tom, about you know, AI agents and what's going on in the AI world. So I just wanted to start with some definitions. So metaphorically, I think about agentic AI kind of like an orchestra and an AI agent as an individual performer. At least I've been holding that distinction in my head. Although I read one of your blogs, and it seems like you kind of perhaps think of these terms more as synonyms. So I just wonder for our audience, first of all, can you define agentic AI, define AI agents, and tell us if there is any difference between them?
Yeah, well, I think your metaphor is interesting and relevant. I think to me, agentic AI is just the overall practice of using AI agents to do stuff, to perform digital tasks, rather than just inform us, as generative AI has done for a while now. But I do think you're right that an individual AI agent typically performs a relatively circumscribed narrow task. And if you really want to accomplish something substantial with AI agents, you need several of them, or maybe hundreds of them in some cases. And that, if you want to call that conglomeration of agents agentic AI, it's not, I don't have any objections to it. I think everybody is going to need it to perform an entire business process, for example, which now I think we really don't have, as far as I know, there are no large organizations saying, oh, I'm going to do order to cash all with AI agents. I'm going to throw away my SAP system. I don't need that anymore. I just have a collection of agents. We don't have that yet. Maybe we'll have it at some point in the future, but I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. So it sounds like we're on the same page as far as the definitions go. So let's drive into a use case. So let me bring Irving into the conversation. So
Yeah.
Irving, on your blog, and in your blog, you wrote about some of Tom's articles,
Yes.
and actually, I should say more precisely, I think the first chapter of a book, Tom, that you had
Right.
just done. Um,
Commercial announcement right here. There
uh,
you go.
there it is. Okay. So actually, that reminds me. So we'll put a link to your book in the
Yeah.
post of the video as well. But Irving, one of the examples that you gave in your blog post hit close to home. You were talking about using agentic AI for vacation planning. And as it turns out, I used generative AI extensively to plan my trip to Europe. And I have to say that it was very successful for two reasons. Number one, the generative AI saved me hundreds of dollars on flights because I think the flights that I had planned came out to about 1,500 bucks per person. The machine cut it down to under 1,000 per person, so that was great. And it also eliminated all my connecting flights. It found airlines that had direct flights, and so I was a happy camper using generative AI. But you talk about agentic AI. There is no way I'm giving an AI my credit card number one. And also, I would be nervous having this thing go off and make the reservations. And I mean, so what I'm wondering, and maybe this is a question for both of you, is, what would be the process? What would this look like to me
Yeah.
if I were to go further, Irving?
Okay, so first let me tell you about that blog because the story is very interesting. Tom is a prolific writer. He writes lots of articles and he's also a clear writer, which means I can understand his articles fairly well. I think I had a very good understanding of what it's called analytics AI, which includes machine learning and deep learning, and it is analyzing lots of information and being able to figure out how to play championship level golf from analyzing lots and lots of Go games. I think I have a very good understanding of generative AI, which is really about sort of the evolution of search, is the way I would describe it in my mind, where you are dealing with an LLM, large language model, that's been trained with lots and lots of information, and you can have a discussion with the large language model in pretty much natural language, and it returns that and so on. Next, about a year ago, I said, agentic AI, that's the next level. Let me try to understand it. And I was truly baffled that I just had a lot of trouble understanding. And some of the examples that they gave felt like magic, like waving hands, and the AI did this. So, what do? I went to my friend Tom and I say, Tom, have you written anything about agentic AI that will help me understand? And Tom quickly replied, well, Irving, as it just so happens, I was involved in writing this book, Agentic AI, and I think that's going to have a very good introduction. I said, gee, how do you have the time to write all this stuff? And Tom said, well, I have a lot of collaborators. And
Plus, I get generative AI to do all my writing for me.
yeah, right. And the book is fairly large, but I learned a huge amount from the introduction. And what the introduction does is it explains the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI, but it does it by using very concrete use cases, very concrete examples. One of the examples, which is the one that you are alluding to here, is about asking the AI to plan a trip that this man wanted to take with his family to Greece. His two children were very interested in Greek mythology and Greek history, and it did an incredible amount of planning. It did a schedule for the whole week of the trip. It gave specific hotels where they could stay at. It gave specific out of the way beaches they can go to, and it was fantastic. So it gave them that. But then the guy said, okay, that's great, but now I have to do all this work. So it took you, I don't know, a minute or two to do this creative work of planning the trip. And it's going to take me hours to now execute the recommendations that you gave me. And in this use case, after a few hours of this poor guy working on trying to get things done, then uh, he gave up, saying, this is really hard. You do the fun work, which is the planning of the trip, and you leave all the grunge work for me. And that was a very good discussion that, as Tom said, AI does the equivalent of the search, the accessing of information, but it doesn't do, I was going to use a word I shouldn't use, it doesn't do anything actual execution. Wouldn't it be nice to have something that does the execution? And
Well, so Irving, I think you bring up an example of a bigger problem, and I think, yeah, let's go back to Tom for this. And the problem is that I think a lot of people see AI as doing the creative work for humans and leaving us to do the trivial work that we don't want to do. And so Tom, in general, do you see the same problem that Irving's describing, and do you see a solution to solving it?
Well, yeah, I think part of the appeal, I think the primary aspect of the appeal of agentic AI is that it can do that kind of boring transactional stuff that none of us really like to do very much. We still have the issue that generative AI is going to do, a lot of our writing and so on, our content creation for us, but it takes a fair amount of effort to review it. And I don't know, I sent a message to my doctor the other day about some upper respiratory symptoms I was having, and he sent me back a message clearly crafted by generative AI with something that begins, "Thank you for reaching out about this patient." And I am the patient, and he's sending me an email. So clearly, he just took the response and put it into an email without editing it, and it clearly lowered my trust level in him. And humans can't do that if we want to maintain high quality content. So there is something left for us humans, even with generative AI doing all that drafting.
let me tell you what I learned from the introduction from the book, and or at least what I think I learned. It may be wrong. Whereas generative AI is about accessing information. It's the evolution of search and so on. Agentic AI is all about application development. It's all about systems engineering. It's all about some technologies to help people develop more and more sophisticated applications. And what it is about is application development has been, I started writing programs in 1962, and I've been programming. Well, I stopped programming after a while and went into management, but we understand application development, and that takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of stuff. And what agentic AI says, Irving, here is a new way of doing this. Decompose the sophisticated application. You're writing an application to automate what a travel agent would do with all that information. Decompose the application so that the travel agent can work with helpers. And some of the helpers will be these AI agents that application developers have defined. Remember, an application has to work. Accessing information, you can get wrong information, but it's just information. If somebody is going to say, here is a travel agent application, then it's going to work and it's been tested and so on. So therefore, Allan, you wouldn't worry about giving this application your credit card
So
because
yeah,
some
actually, yes, I would. And so if the generative AI, so in my experience, what the generative AI did was it said, okay, these are the flights that you need to get in the airlines that you need to use in order to get the lowest prices and direct flights. And it not only said that, it said, if I were you, I would go to Google Flights in order to find these flights and then do it. Now, if the AI, the generative AI had an agent where it could have popped open a window, with that flight, and then I could have filled in, my credit card and just gotten the flight right then and there, fine, I would have been happy. But but giving it my credit card is not a step
but, but,
I
but
personally would take. And I'm gonna flip back to Tom here. I believe in one of your blog posts, Tom, you reported that Gartner is talking about 40% of AI projects being canceled by 2027 due to
AI
AI
agentic
agent
AI. Yeah,
projects.
yeah.
yeah,
So Irving, I'm not sure that I'm the only one
no,
who
no, but I have,
information.
but listen to my view of what I'm expecting. I can imagine Travelocity or Kayak. These are all um, companies that are in the travel business, correct, Tom and Allan?
Yeah.
And I can imagine Travelocity building an application that if you give it certain info, they are really, that application is supposed to pretty much be a travel agent kind of application. Instead of just making a reservation on an airline or a hotel, you give it lots of information, and maybe the application is linked to an Gen AI search that gives you stuff in a certain order. And then the application is going to go ahead and do the kinds of things a travel agent would do. And because it comes from Travelocity or Kayak or American Airlines or somebody, by definition, you'll trust it the same way when you go to the airline
So
website.
fair enough. Maybe I would put my credit card into an application. I think the difference is that if I were working with a human travel agent, I might delegate to them to actually make the travel reservations. If I'm working with a machine, I would want that experience to be more like me sitting side by side with my wife and looking at the options and then making the reservations. I would not be comfortable delegating the full boat the way I would with a human travel agent.
And if it's a well-designed application, I can imagine Travelocity giving you options of how involved you want to be. If the hotel wasn't there, should we go back to you? Should we offer alternative? So now I am full force, and Tom, since I think I learned this from you, from the introduction, I am full force into application development, and the application can be as sophisticated as you want to get it. And what is good here is in the same way that we have subroutines and we have modules and so on, now the application is being done between humans and these subroutines that they have developed to help them do things that they do over and over and over. That's the way I interpreted, Tom, what one should be doing. Am I correct in that interpretation?
Well, I think there's several things to point out. I mean, one, Allan, I think is very reasonable not to want to do this now because we're not there yet in terms of the ability of agentic AI. Two, yes, I think there will be large-scale organizations, maybe collections of organizations that use agents to execute on a variety of transactions. I think for us to trust them, they're going to have to give us fairly detailed instructions about, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Are you okay with it? And click yes if you are. And also to have some reversibility. You know, we have the ability in making airline reservations in the United States, if it's not one that you're taking tomorrow, to change it in 24 hours with no penalty. And that's going to be even more important, I think. But all of this sort of infrastructure, the sophisticated programming hasn't really been developed. And I think one of my beliefs about agentic AI is it can't just be generative AI because it still makes too many mistakes. It's hallucinates, it's probabilistic, and sometimes it guesses wrong on what's the next best thing to do. So we need some deterministic capabilities as well, you know, be it rules or if-then statements or whatever that we understand will always produce the same result.
But programming is by definition deterministic. Am I not correct?
Well, I mean, traditional programming, yes, that doesn't involve statistics. You know, it's when we get into machine learning and statistics that we introduce probability.
Well, so maybe a travel agent can say, well, look, if I can get you this, would you like it? You know.
So Tom, can you get back to this Gartner study? I mean, if I recall your article correctly, there was a claim that agentic AI has sort of hit the peak of the hype cycle, and now it has to go through disillusionment and then
disillusionment, yes, as generative AI has now entered. Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think of the Gartner stuff as it sounds scientific. It's really impressionistic. Nobody's got a lot of data that they're using to create these predictions. But I think that there will be problems with the early agentic AI systems, and we haven't yet developed the network of providers of agents that we can trust. We haven't yet entirely figured out how do we connect them. We're making progress. We have these tools like MCP, Model Context Protocol from Anthropic that I think are going to help a lot, and there's some other alternatives to that. But we're in the very, very early days, and I think it is fair to say, despite the fact the world is going to move in this direction, that there's too much hype about this
But
concept now.
see, what I am bringing here to dispel the magic. Remember, I understood analytics AI, I understood Gen AI, the fact that it's probabilistic when you're searching for information. But programming in my mind, I'm bringing is part of, let me call it the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is programming is hard, and it's hard because it has to work and it has to be tested and it has to be done well. But programming has advanced tremendously since I started writing in assembly language in 1962. And there are higher and higher level tools. And now you have this notion of the subroutines, which I'll call agents that can help you do things and so on. But because, and by the way, Tom and Allan, this gets back to engineering. If you're going to build an airplane, you're going to decompose it. You don't just look at the whole airplane at once. You decompose it into different parts, and different parts are being done by different groups, and different groups then come together. So this decomposition is intrinsic to engineering disciplines, and programming is an engineering discipline, even though, let me just add, it's an engineering discipline that doesn't get taught in elite schools like MIT. I have no idea. At MIT, you learn mechanical engineering, you learn nuclear engineering. I have no idea where people learn sort of the programming kind of engineering. I think
So, so,
programming
so,
is,
so Irving, since you're talking about programming, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You made the comment that generative AI is like an advanced search, and I want to push back on that. You can use generative AI to actually generate code. The code has to be it.
Yeah, mixing probabilistic and using a probabilistic technology to generate deterministic technology.
Exactly. And but my point is that generating code is nothing like search. I mean, we're using generative AI for tasks that, I mean, I just feel like calling it an advanced search doesn't capture what it does.
and everybody tells you it can help you in programming, but please test the program
But that
before.
would be true if a human did the program.
Of course, but
So
that's
how
the
is it different?
no, no, that's the whole point, that you are using the in generative AI. When you're doing something, you're asking it for help and it offers the help, but then it's up to the human to figure out if that's the help they're looking for or not, if this is the answer to the question they are after.
So
And
So I just want to challenge the ask the human part. Okay, so I used generative AI to write the report for the 2025 symposium. I had one AI write a summary from the transcript, and I had another AI check it for accuracy, right? Sometimes the first AI hallucinated, so then I had to have the second AI rewrite it, and so you go through a process of using multiple AIs, but in fact it was all AIs doing the double checking, not a human. I mean, I was orchestrating the AIs, but AIs was doing the heavy lifting.
well, and let me point out, and the last check was Alan's brain to say, I
No,
like
no, no.
this.
The last check was Irving's brain. I sent the document to you.
Well, and and and
Fortunately, he never makes any mistakes, so that would be fine.
I know exactly. That's
no,
why
no,
we.
in all seriousness, I think this notion of helping decompose a very sophisticated application letting the human engineers, let me call them that, decompose the problem and have a whole set of, can I call it subroutines, Tom, of things that have been pre-done, and maybe you work with partners that have done a particularly good job in that application component, but the overall design is done by the orchestrator, which is a human now working with humans and more of these components. I think that over time will be a huge advance in application development. That's what I'm hoping for. And it will take time, but that's a very big advance. I'm very happy. But again, taking the Judeo-Christian view, application development by definition, because the damn thing has to work, is hard work. It's not for the faint of heart. That's my view.
You're not a believer in vibe coding?
Vibe coding is a tool, but in the end, it's up to the human to say, oh yeah, I like this and I'm going to continue.
Yeah.
I'm a very existentially, again, I keep going back. Life is hard.
Yeah, there was that interesting Cornell study. I don't know if either of you saw it, suggesting that if you do include human review, vibe coding doesn't turn out to be nearly as productive as we thought. And if you don't include human review, you're probably going to get in big trouble.
By the way, another example use case that I learned from Tom's book was about an emergency room hospital where somebody comes in and then you have to get lots of information about the patient, about all the things that are there, and you have to monitor the patient, and if something goes wrong, the whole thing has to be carefully orchestrated. My God, I don't know if we have emergency room applications like that today. You know the example I mean, Tom, right? Since you probably wrote it. This is life and
Unless
death.
it's AI wrote it for him, you know.
Yeah,
This
we
is,
don't have it. And the reason we don't have it is you have a very high standard of functionality that has to be met in those clinical applications. And we're not there yet with agentic AI or even any of the, you go into a hospital today, there's been lots of research on AI. You're very unlikely to find anything at the bedside, basically.
but one thing that I thought was very interesting here is, okay, so I go to the emergency room, and then one of the things the emergency room nurse wanted right away is I told them I had an operation, whatever, and they say, let me get your records from the hospital where you got it. And there was no way to have the agent in the emergency room coordinate with the agent in the hospital that did my thing. So part of that is that part of what we need is define agent to agent standards, which I believe is what the Manda project in MIT is trying to develop. Am I correct about that? That is trying to make it easier for, let's say, the emergency room agent to query the agent in another hospital and get the necessary information because somebody came in with a problem. But I can see agent to agent standards developing over time, and that would be very useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. Although I think there's more to it than technology that would enable that. We've had the ability to exchange patient information electronically for a really long time, and it still doesn't happen terribly often. Even if they're both hospitals are using the same electronic health record system, chances are not very good that they can import your import your records easily. And agents, yeah, maybe they'll help with it, but I think there are a lot of inter-organizational issues as well.
Hey, Tom, I'd like to ask you a question in order to challenge something that Irving said, just because it's always fun to,
No, please do.
wrestle with Irving a little bit. So
Yeah.
he's basically painting a picture, at least my interpretation of, we have AIs, generative or agents or whatever, but somehow the human always stays at the top. But I don't know if that is necessarily always going to be the case. I mean, first of all, I think it introduces this problem of the AI doing the creative work and the humans doing the boring work, which is a problem that I think you brought out in your blog and a problem that everybody is thinking about. But also, there was this University of Virginia study, right? I think you guys claim it was actually Harvard, but I included the link. I gave you guys the link. So
I
let me just
stand corrected. The Harvard MIT project was a radiology related project with a similar outcome, actually. Yeah.
So the outcome here, you take a bunch of doctors and you have them do diagnostics on patients, right? They can use whatever tools they want, including Google, and they get it right about 73, 74% of the time. So now you give them ChatGPT plus another group of doctors, and oh, look at that. Their accuracy increases to now 76, 77%. That's great, right? But now you take ChatGPT and just let it work alone, and the accuracy increases to 92%. So, then you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe when I'm sick, I do want to have a conversation with the AI. And Irving, I see you shaking your head, but I actually want Tom to weigh in on this, but from the prospect of are there tasks where, the AI eventually, humans aren't going to beat AI at chess anymore. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
They,
to use
yes,
your analogy, for quite a while, we could argue that the best chess players in the world were freestyle chess players, humans with a variety of computer programs that they could choose between, and they were better than either humans alone or chess
correct.
programs alone. I think, as you suggest, that's no longer the case, and I think that will probably be true in various other aspects of life before too long. I think the problem with, the radiology one that I mentioned was sort of similar in terms of outcome, in that the AI alone ended up doing better than just the human by him or herself and the human working with AI. It's because, we're still in the very early days of equipping professionals like these doctors to really understand what AI is good at and what it isn't. And in many cases, if it's somehow different from their perspective on what the patient is experiencing, either a diagnosis or a radiology image, they ignore it. And in many cases, that's going to lower the accuracy of their diagnosis or their image interpretation. So we have to become expert at working alongside these systems if we hope to have any involvement in important decisions in the future, and we're just not now.
But I think that coming up with a diagnosis based on symptoms is a way of accessing information which Gen AI is superb at. I mean, in fact, we've been counting on parallel supercomputers and advanced algorithms to analyze lots and lots and lots and lots of information and come up with all kinds of recommendations for a long time. And I think that's the most advanced AI application is the world of research. Now, there is a difference in my mind between the fact that the Gen AI application had a better diagnose than the doctors. But if you now say, okay, so therefore, now the AI is going to plan the whole treatment of this patient based on that diagnosis, at that point, we are now back in the equivalent of making the reservations. And I think at that point, you will need humans involved working with the AI. You will need different hospitals involved communicating with each other. So the example you came up with,
In what time period, Irving?
I think over the next, let me say, 10, 20 years, which is not unreasonable for writing these super sophisticated applications that where humans will collaborate with AI agent components to be able to get things done. That I am comfortable that will happen. And when we understand it, it won't feel like magic. It will feel like, God, Irving, well, by then I'll be 100, so God knows where Irving is. Um, do you know that there was a time when the application only could be written by the human and you didn't have all these components that could help you, that the human could orchestrate?
Irving, I didn't mention that I was going to make a synthetic Irving, so you're going to be on this podcast forever.
Okay. So I look forward to reading Tom's article on
So,
synthetic humans.
so, 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 Tom, following up on what Irving said, okay, I mean, he believes humans will be in the loop for a long time, 10 or 20 years, but I still maintain that there will be examples that are pop up where it'll be like chess. Yeah, we're going to collaborate for a while, but eventually we're going to have to give up the ghost in some cases. And you mentioned that this puts a psychological strain on humans when they're being trained to work with AI. So can you just elaborate on that? What
Yeah.
should companies be doing to prepare the workforce for this, for the stress of working with synthetic intelligence?
I think in some cases it'll be stressful, and in some cases it will probably relieve stress. But this is happening every day. I wrote a book 3 or 4 years ago with MIT Press called "Working with AI," and it had 29 examples of people who spent every working hour working alongside AI, and they all seem to be fine with it. Many of them did say it was a little bit more intellectually demanding because they had to sort of be auditing what the AI was doing, and they got the hard cases. AI would handle the easy cases, but none of them really thought their jobs were horrible. In some cases, they thought they were improved. I think nobody really knows what's going to happen in the distant future in this regard. Will AI take over all of our important decisions? If so, we better start preparing for that by figuring out other ways to, give people a source of income and a source of meaning in their lives. But for the moment, I think we're much better off in almost every case thinking about augmentation rather than large automation, and trying to get the best out of the human and the best out of the machine, and being not only, as Irving keeps saying, the machines generally are sort of programmed. Sometimes there's a statistical prediction on. It's not. It's not very innovative, and we would hope that humans would rise to the occasion and say, "Yeah, I know generative AI is going to say this, it's based on everything every human has ever said about the topic. I want to know something new, or that doesn't fit my context very well. I need to revise it." But it does put some increased responsibility. We have to step up our game.
And I
Yeah,
think that
well,
what, no, go ahead, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I agree with everything you're saying. I just want to point out that, it's always easier to imagine the jobs that technology is going to eliminate than the jobs that'll be created,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I imagine there's going to be a lot of roles for humans that none of us can imagine, but I don't know what they are.
Well, for just as an example, uh, we've heard there is more and more people talk about robotic surgery, where you have these tools that go in and do things, and you could say it's a kind of agentic AI where the tool is looking around inside you and giving you the information and giving you advice. But that feels like the natural evolution of any discipline, because now you've trained the surgeons to work with these tools. And if if the tool makes a mistake or does it, the surgeon cannot say, well, it's the tool that failed me, because everybody knows that part of the training is how the surgeon will apply his or her judgment to the information. And everybody knows there are going to be mistakes. And so what I see happening is the people will be trained to work with these new, very advanced, quote unquote, intelligent tools, but people will be trained. I cannot imagine that you'll trust a surgery to just a tool. You'll have the experts around you to do that, unless you are, in the middle of the Amazon and they drop the tool via parachute to do something, to take out your appendix and teach you how to do that. That would be an interesting movie. But
Yeah,
uh,
right now, I think surgical robotics is a good example because it's sort of, I think 70 or 80% of the intelligence is coming from the human surgeon and 20% is coming from the machine, and it's sort of giving the surgeon sort of the ability to cut straighter lines and see in greater detail what's going on at the wound. But I think that that percentage is going to shift over time. There's
no
no doubt about
question.
it. And there are already experiments with routine surgeries that are done entirely by surgical robots, and I think we'll see more and more of those over time.
But but
So
but
I
but
just
but
want to
anyway,
get
there's going to be a physician in charge at some point or another. It
We
may
got
be
to have somebody to bring our malpractice suit against.
just to emphasize the unpredictability of what humans are going to do, Irving, I think you told a story about, when ATMs came out, everybody thought it was going to eliminate all the banking jobs, but in fact, the people who were tellers got elevated to a customer service role and the employment actually increased. So
right.
nobody predicted that.
Yeah,
Am I
David
not
Author.
correct?
I learned that from David Author. David also wrote a number of articles that if you look at compare the jobs that existed in 1940 to the jobs in 2018, 60% of the jobs in 2018 didn't exist in 1940. They just didn't exist. And I suspect that will happen, that a huge percentage of the jobs in uh, 2040 will not have existed in 2025. That's part of the advancement. Whole new jobs get created. And that's what puts so much pressure on education and learning, because that means that the people have to keep learning new skills to now work with the new technologies in these new jobs. And
Yeah, by the way, David Autor did not do that research. It was done by James Besson at Boston University, not MIT. Not that I have anything against MIT or David Autor, who's a very impressive economist. But I think one thing that's really, I'm working on a little paper now involving the attempt to predict how many people are going to lose their jobs because of AI. And they have one thing in common, these predictions, of which there are a lot. They are wildly, wildly wrong, usually overly negative, pessimistic. Some are also overly optimistic about the number of new jobs that are created. So I think we underestimate the inertia in organizations that prohibits either automating and laying off lots of people or creating lots of new jobs to, help deal with AI.
Hey, Tom, let's just pivot to an optimistic point of view for a second. One of the things that Irving and I have been talking about a lot is how AI can help with problems where it's difficult to scale human labor. Let me give you two examples. One is in education. It's very hard to get a one-to-one teacher-student ratio, right? So there's this school in Texas, which is assigning an AI under teacher supervision, or if that's not, and the AI gives individual instruction for 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and then the teacher can focus on group cohesion, leadership, sort of Boy Scouty type of learning experiences for the students. And that combination, it looks to be very promising. Another one is in healthcare. It's very difficult and very expensive to assign an individual worker to help different people with various disabilities, especially aging, which is, I guess we're all thinking about that. But perhaps the new technology would allow us to scale up the individual care that we give to people. So I think there's a lot of potential opportunities where AI can improve the human condition and allow us to scale up the services we provide to humans. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there is opportunity. I'm not sure that the Alpha School, which is the school that you describe in Austin, and now it's in a few other places, is the best example because they charge up to $65,000 a year for students to have this approach. And one would like to think that AI would lower the cost of instruction, not raise it to that level. And there's also a kind of an anti-woke, anti-DEI element to it, which I'm not sure is necessary. So, but yeah, there are tons of situations, healthcare, education, where we can't afford to give people the quality of services that they need and deserve, and AI could really help with that. But I'm not sure our early examples have been great examples.
But wouldn't you expect,
Yeah,
wouldn't
go
you
ahead.
expect startups to start developing much less expensive versions of helping individual students or providing some healthcare monitoring and let the free market and the startup innovation, let the competition take care of that as has happened in other things? That's what I would expect. Wouldn't you expect that to happen, that there'll be more startups trying to compete in these very vertical areas?
I hope so. And you could argue that Khan Academy is now more a supplement to education rather than an educational system itself. Although I think they have one school that's just Khan Academy school. But yeah, I think there will be lots of startups, and I hope actually we see it at the university level, not just at the K through 12 level. And we're already seeing in China a lot of really great kind of intelligent telemedicine mobile apps that are dramatically improving the availability of medical care for people who can't afford, to visit a doctor.
Yeah, and Allan, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask Tom a question about
Please.
something you and I have been thinking a lot about. So there's been a lot of discussion whether universities should, like, let's take MIT, Babson, should allow students to use AI tools in their studies. And the answer is, this is like asking, should you allow them to use the internet, which is in the real world they are all going to. They will be
For calculators,
surrounded. I'm sorry?
for calculators for math or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll be surrounded by tools. So one of the questions we've been pondering is, let's take MIT. How should the education of MIT college and graduate students evolve so they can start taking advantage of the best possible AI tools that they will find in their work? And that's an area of discussion with some people saying, oh, no, you have to take blue book tests only. And other people saying, this is live now. So this is like the calculator and the internet. What do you think?
I'm a big advocate of bringing back slide rules to do all of this calculation. No, fortunately, most of my colleagues at Babson agree with this. We had some that asked our IT department, can we shut off AI on the campus? And the answer was no, fortunately. But I think we have to do that, Irving. We have to teach people how to use it effectively. And people who know how to use it well will be more productive and effective in the workplace. And so they'll be at a huge disadvantage if we don't teach them. But it's not easy. And I think over time, there will be kind of topic specific, domain specific tools that say, for example, there's now a tool from this company, Grammarly, that observes the process that you use in writing to see how many different iterations did you try, how much editing did you do. Right now, I've been trying that with my students. It's like pulling teeth to get them to do that. But once they know that it's going to be carefully monitored and so on, I think the same thing is true of programming. We need to teach people how do we use these tools effectively in writing computer programs, and we should evaluate, did they edit? How much did they change it? Did they bring some of their own perspectives to it and grade them accordingly?
Yeah, but Tom, a lot of people are complaining that tools like Grammarly is making writing bland. It's homogenizing and people are losing their individual ways of expressing things and perhaps having more human mistakes in the writing is actually a feature, not a bug. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm not that big of a fan of grammatical mistakes, but I don't know what I'm not defending Grammarly specifically, but they do send me, I think it's a weekly report saying how many unique words did I use? And you'll be glad to know that I'm in the 75th percentile, I think, of unique words.
I would have expected you to be in the 95th.
I actually don't pay for Grammarly, so I don't know. Maybe if I use the paid version, I would.
Oh, they definitely bump you up if you were given.
But I think this is like looking at CAD/CAM. Did it transform mechanical engineering design? Absolutely. But can you still differentiate between great designers and non-great designers? And I suspect the same thing will happen with the AI tools we're talking about. And the worst thing you can do is to say, we don't want you to use them. It's going to be more, what would be the right way for the universities to now transform their disciplines to take advantage of their tools like they did with CAD/CAM and EDA?
Yeah, I agree with you. Although there was a New York Times article a few years ago saying, want a job? Fine, go to college and don't major in architecture, because all of the entry-level architecture jobs were drafting, basically, and that was being taken over by CAD/CAM. So we have to become much more flexible and resilient in terms of the kinds of capabilities that we're training people with, so that they're not caught in a profession that doesn't really exist anymore. And I think to some degree, people who do programming and studied computer science at the entry level are experiencing some of that right now.
They definitely are. So, Tom, I'm going to ask a question that you probably nobody likes this question, but you're the expert, and we're talking about agentic AI. Can you just kind of lay out for us for the next couple of years how you think this is going to unfold in terms of companies developing what's going to happen? Are they going to develop libraries of, agentic subroutines that people can put in? Is there going to be a rise in, startup companies? What's your vision for how this is going to unfold in the next couple, 3 years?
Well, I do think that aggressive companies I know they're already starting to develop those kind of agent libraries that people can use. And, it's not, I think of companies like AT&T that have a lot of technical people. They were already developing, feature stores for machine learning. And this is kind of only a step beyond that. I think we really need large, trustworthy organizations to step up and say, okay, we're making these available for broad use in the same way that Apple and Google do it for mobile apps, and they charge something for the use of them, but they also certify that they do what they're supposed to do. I think in Apple's case, they were probably charging too much, but that's another issue.
Isn't Microsoft doing that with their co-processors, or what do they call it?
Copilot.
Co-pilots, aren't they doing that to some extent?
I haven't seen any evidence of, all of these companies are offering agent-like capabilities, but I think they don't draw on a network. They give you the ability to create them and call upon them, but I don't think they have a network to use. But, the hyperscalers, the cloud providers would be well suited to do that kind of work, and to, they already supply a lot of computing resources to organizations. Doing it for agents would make sense. But I think we need this ecosystem, this infrastructure to be developed before the area is really gonna take off.
Yeah, but I am hopeful. I mean, let's take the hardest application area I know, which is healthcare, and we spend 18 to 20% of GDP already in healthcare in the US. We badly need to increase productivity. And that's an area where these kinds of tools could help immensely, but it won't be easy, obviously, and especially in healthcare, because first, experimentation is a little bit tougher since you don't want to kill patients. And second, because it's highly regulated, startups may have more trouble getting in. But I am optimistic that all this will happen.
Yeah, and it's already starting in the easier parts of healthcare to use agents and automation, which is the administrative side. And
yes,
out of that, all that money you mentioned, about 30% is for administration, and that's crazy. We don't need to be spending that much on healthcare administration. And payers and providers are starting to automate some of the process of prior approvals and so on. It's still a mess, but I think there's some possibility of it getting straightened out over the next several years with AI helping a lot.
So what would be the other industries, Tom, that you see agentic AI gaining a foothold? Would it be insurance, finance, besides healthcare?
Well, insurance and finance are the most, sort of back office structured transaction oriented organizations. So you would think that they would be the first, although we do need those trustworthy providers of services, because that's real money involved there. And also, since as Willie Sutton always said, he robbed banks because that's where the money was. If you're a cyber hacker, there's already evidence that people are starting to use agents. I was reading this morning about an Anthropic discovery that people were using agents to do all sorts of dastardly things from a cybersecurity perspective. And so we've got to work that out before that industry becomes, really agentic, so to speak. But I think industries that have both a lot of research and transactions, wealth management would fall into that category, travel, as we were discussing, even entertainment. It's almost a full-time job to decide what movie do you want to watch tonight. And agentic AI could help with that. If it knew your preferences and the transaction levels are relatively small, sure, send $5 to Amazon Video for me. I'm happy to trust you for that.
All right. Well, we've gone an hour. Irving, do you have a closing question for Tom?
When is your next book? And actually, I already asked him either earlier this week or last week about business process reengineering, because I read a very good McKinsey article about the fact that the infrastructure for processes in the AI world has to change. And I asked, Tom, do you have anything you've written? And he quickly sent me 3 articles about business process reengineering in the age of AI, which I've started to read. Am I not correct, Tom, that this is a very interesting area you expect?
It is. I don't know whether I'm going to write a book about it or not, but I wrote the first book, if not the best-selling book. Mike Hammer and Jim Champia, the best-selling book, but theirs was ghostwritten. I actually wrote mine about business process reengineering. So I'm always happy to sort of, when something occurs, to bring back something I was quite interested in the past. I actually do have a new book that's newer than the agentic one, called The New Science of Customer Relationships, with a guy named Jim Stern. And it's about using all these forms of AI to try to solve this elusive question of when the heck are we going to get real one-to-one marketing? We've been promised it for several decades now, and we still get mostly crappy offers and ads that, either we bought it or searched for it already, or it's something we have no interest in whatsoever. I made the mistake of buying an e-bike last week, and now every day I get an ad from the same company, buy our e-bike. It's really quite depressing. So we think there's the possibility for using these tools and new data and various forms of AI and agentic. We have a chapter on that to try to finally get some higher quality marketing.
Yeah, by the way, the reason I asked Tom about reengineering is because there have been a few articles that you see AI everywhere except in productivity, that the productivity, all these companies are spending all this money and you don't see productivity at all, which reminded me of the famous solo paradox with IT. And Tom wrote the book in the early 90s about business process reengineering that said, before we start seeing productivity for IT, we need to re-engineer the processes that the business use. Am I correct?
You are correct. But as you said earlier, Irving, life is hard, and it proved to be very difficult to sort of redesign your process and then fully support it with IT and train all the people and so on. We were talking about Eric Brynjolfsson's work this morning, and he said, you're not going to get productivity from IT or AI or anything unless you do all of those other
But
things in addition to supplying the technology. And most people
remember that
bother.
all along I have said I'm a huge believer in the Judeo-Christian tradition that life is a bitch and then you die, meaning you want to do reengineering. Of course, it's going to be difficult because otherwise we would have done it already. And we don't even know, I'm being totally serious now, what kind of infrastructure reengineering or business process reengineering we need to do to accommodate the world of AI. And I don't even know where the research is there, but that should be a fascinating area.
All right, well, life is a bitch and then you die. I think that's a note to bring this episode to a close. Tom, if we haven't told you already, Irving and I love having you join us either on our podcast or one of our other online series or at the symposium itself. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation. And for everybody in our audience, thanks for joining us for episode 12. Come to our online community and also note that Irving posts his blog there on the online community. Tom has a Substack, which both of us subscribe to, and get some of his books on your reading list. But that's all we have for
Great
today.
idea. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.